HOA Karen put a $10,000 fine on the wheelchair ramp my disabled father needed just to leave his own house. She called it ugly, unsafe, and bad for property values. I didn't yell. I didn't beg the board. I built a paper trail because 2 weeks earlier I'd already sent the medical accommodations request. She ignored. And the state law she laughed at was about to destroy everything she thought she controlled. The red notice was taped to the front door at 7:06 on a Thursday morning. I know the time because my doorbell camera had been recording since before sunrise. And later, that little timestamp would become one of the cleanest pieces of evidence in the whole case. I was in the hallway, helping my father settle into his wheelchair, when my phone buzzed, motion detected at front porch. Dad looked up from under the brim of his old Navy ball cap. "Delivery?" he asked. "I don't know." We opened the camera feed, and there she was. Karen Whitmore, president of the Briar Creek Estates HOA, standing on my porch with a red violation notice in one hand and a roll of tape in the other. She wore her white HOA polo, the one with the association logo over the chest, and she had that stiff little smile people wear when they think rules belong to them. She pressed the notice flat against my door. Not in the mailbox, not in an envelope. Right on the front door where every neighbor walking a dog or driving to work could see it. Then she stepped back and stared at the ramp. My father's wheelchair ramp. 16 feet of treated lumber handrails on both sides, non-slip strips on the boards, and a gentle slope from the porch to the front walkway. It had been installed only 12 days earlier, after Dad came home from the rehab hospital following his stroke. Before the stroke, Frank Miller fixed everything himself. Engines, water heaters, screen doors, lawnmowers. He once rebuilt a carburetor on our kitchen table while my mother yelled at him for getting grease on the placemats. He was the kind of man who never asked for help until his body betrayed him. Now he could not stand without someone holding him under the arm. The ramp was not a decoration. It was not a remodeling project. Gray. It was the only way my father could leave his own house without being lifted like furniture. Karen leaned toward the doorbell camera, held up the red paper, and said, "David, this is your final notice. The ramp is an unapproved exterior structure. You have 72 hours to remove it, or the association will proceed with contractor removal and additional charges." My father heard her through the phone speaker. His hand tightened around the wheelchair armrest. "How much?" he asked. I did not want to tell him, but Karen did it for me. She tapped the paper and said, "The balance is now $10,000, plus $250 per day until compliance. $10,000 for a ramp, for a disabled man's ramp, for the thing that let my father feel morning air on his face without me dragging him down two porch steps like a sack of concrete." "Behind me," Dad whispered. "Don't fight her, son." That broke something in me. My father had worked shipyards, engine rooms, and night shifts. He had come home with busted knuckles, bad knees, and grease under his nails. But a piece of HOA letterhead had made him sound small in his own hallway. That is what fake HOA fines do to decent people. They turn your home into a place where you start asking permission to exist. I opened the door. Karen was halfway down the ramp, inspecting it like she was shopping for reasons to hate it. "Good morning, Karen," I said. She turned with a practiced sigh. "David, I was hoping you would take this seriously before it got to this point." I looked at the red notice. $10,000? "That is the accumulated fine and enforcement assessment," she said. "You ignored multiple warnings." "No," I said. I disputed multiple warnings. Her smile tightened across the street. Mrs. Parker, a widow in her 70s, had stopped beside her mailbox. She watched with one hand at her throat. Karen noticed the audience and lifted her voice. "This is not personal, David. Nobody is questioning your father's condition, but the board still has a duty to protect the appearance and consistency of this community." That sounded reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. Every HOA Karen has a phrase she hides behind. In our neighborhood, Karen used community standards like a lock on everyone else's front door, property values, architectural uniformity, respect for the process. But there was nothing respectful about telling an old man his way out of the house was an eyesore. I kept my voice low, because Dad's blood pressure did not need my anger. That ramp was installed because my father had a stroke. We sent the medical accommodation request, the doctor letter, the contractor invoice, and the photos by certified mail. Karen lifted her chin. The ramp was not approved by the architectural committee. The committee never reviewed it. That is because your submission was incomplete. It had everything you asked for. It did not have approval, she said. I stared at her. That was Karen's favorite circle. She would not review something because it was not approved, then punish you because it had not been reviewed. My father rolled himself slowly into the doorway behind me. The wheels bumped over the threshold, and I turned immediately to steady him. He hated that, not my help, the needing of it. Karen looked at him, then at the ramp, and impatience crossed her face before she could hide it. Mr. Miller, she said, softening her voice without softening the cruelty, we all sympathize with your situation. But if we allow every medical exception to change the exterior of a home, this neighborhood starts losing its character. My father's eyes dropped. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I did not give it to her, not yet. Karen, I said, you need to be careful what you say on this porch. Her eyes, flicked to the little black doorbell camera. For half a second she remembered. It was there. Then pride stepped in. I am enforcing the covenants. You are ignoring a disability accommodation request. I am protecting the association from unapproved construction. Dad's doctor says he needs this ramp. Karen gave a short laugh, and then she said the sentence that would follow her all the way to the HOA meeting. I didn't care what his doctor says. This neighborhood is not a nursing home. The street went quiet. Mrs. Parker's mouth opened. My father closed his eyes. And I knew. Right then Karen had handed me something no lawyer could manufacture: intent, cruelty. Proof that she knew exactly what the ramp was for and chose aesthetics anyway. I did not point at the camera. I did not smile. I simply looked at the doorbell camera, then back at Karen. Karen, I said, you just made this a legal record. Her face changed. Not much, just enough. She recovered quickly and pointed at the ramp. If this structure is still here after 72 hours, the HOA will hire a contractor to remove it and bill your account. My father has a follow-up appointment Monday morning. Then you should have planned ahead. That was the second sentence I saved. Planned ahead, as if my father had scheduled his stroke around her landscaping preferences. Dad's breathing changed behind me. Shorter, thinner. The red notice listed everything. Karen wanted us to fear $10,000, $250 a day, contractor removal, possible lien action, attorney referral. Those words were not designed to solve a problem. They were designed to scare an old man back inside his house. Dad looked at Karen and said, Ma'am, I served this country for 22 years. I am not asking for a swimming pool. I am asking to get to my own mailbox. For one brief second, I thought that might reach her. It did not. Karen held her clipboard closer. Service does not exempt homeowners from architectural standards. Mrs. Parker gasped from across the street. That was when I stepped down onto the ramp, putting myself between Karen and my father. That's enough. Karen's eyes brightened, like she had been waiting for me to raise my voice. You're becoming aggressive, David. I lowered my voice immediately. No, I am becoming very careful. I took out my phone and photographed the red notice on the door, then the ramp, the handrails, the wheelchair behind me. Karen standing there with her clipboard. The doorbell camera above us, she scoffed. Pictures will not change the rules. No, I said, but they preserve what happened. That line bothered her. She stepped off the ramp and onto the walkway. You have 72 hours. After that, the association will proceed. Who voted on that? The board has authority, I asked. Who voted? She looked toward Mrs. Parker, then back at me. You are not entitled to interrogate the board on your front porch. Then send the meeting minutes. Her smile turned sharp. You people always think paperwork is some kind of weapon? I looked at the notice again. At the red ink, the fine total, the threat to remove the only accessible exit my father had. No, I said, paperwork is where people like you get caught. She walked away, stiff-backed, angry, and still convinced she was in control. I watched until she reached the sidewalk, then I helped my father roll backward into the house. He did not speak until we reached the living room. Maybe we should take it down, he said. I knelt in front of his chair. No, I don't want to cost you your house. Not costing me anything, that paper said, Lean. I know what it said. His voice cracked. I already lost my legs, David. I don't want to lose my place here too. I put my hand over his. This is your place. Then I went back to the front door and peeled the red notice off slowly, careful not to tear the tape. I slid it into a clear sleeve, wrote the date and time on a sticky note, saved the doorbell footage to 3 folders, and emailed the clip to myself. That was the thing Karen Never understood. I was not quiet because I was scared. I was quiet because 2 weeks before, she taped that $10,000 fine to my door. I had already sent the certified medical accommodation request. I had the receipt. I had the doctor letter. I had the state law printed and highlighted. I had the management company's confirmation that they received it. And I had Karen's emails every time she wrote about aesthetics before access. She left another fingerprint. Every time she said property values mattered more than medical necessity, she made the case clearer. Every time she claimed the board had authority without producing minutes, she tightened the rope around her own chair. By the time she walked away from my ramp that morning, I already had a folder on my laptop called Frank Ramp Accommodation. And after what she said about my father's doctor, that folder was no longer just a record. It was a case. But to understand how an HOA president convinced herself she could fine a disabled man $10,000 for leaving his house, I need to take you back 16 days. Back to the afternoon my father came home from the hospital. Back to the first email I sent Karen. And back to the moment she decided a wheelchair ramp was not a medical necessity. It was a violation. 16 days before Karen taped that red notice to my front door, my father came home from the rehab hospital. It was a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky looks low enough to touch the roof lines. And I remember thinking the house looked smaller than it used to, not because anything had changed, because Dad had Frank Miller used to fill a doorway. Not with size exactly, but with presence. He was 82, retired Navy, retired mechanic. And still the kind of man who would rather crawl under a sink with a flashlight than pay someone else to tighten a fitting. Before the stroke, he kept a coffee can full of mismatched screws in the garage, and somehow always knew which one belonged to which job after the stroke. He came home in a wheelchair, with a folder of discharge papers on his lap. The transport driver helped me get him from the van to the porch, and that was when reality hit. 2 steps. That was all it took to turn my father's house into a problem. 2 ordinary porch steps he had walked up thousands of times without thinking. 2 steps he had carried groceries over, Christmas decorations over, my mother's flower pots over, and once half a transmission because he refused to wait for help. Now those 2 steps might as well have been a wall. The nurse looked at me and said, "You're going to need a ramp before his follow-up appointments." Dad stared at the porch boards like they had betrayed him. "I can manage," he said. He could not. And we both knew it. That night, after I got him settled in the living room, I sat at the kitchen table with the discharge packet, the doctor's note, and a list of things I did not know how to handle, yet medication schedule, physical therapy, blood pressure logs, fall risk, bathroom grab bars, ramp installation. I was 56, divorced, and working as a regional parts manager for an auto supply company. I had moved back into my childhood home after Mom passed so Dad would not have to be alone. It was supposed to be temporary. Then life did what life does. It made temporary permanent. The house was not fancy 3 bedrooms, brick front, narrow porch, a maple tree in the yard my mother planted the year I graduated high school. Briar Creek Estates had an HOA, but for most of the 14 years I lived there, the association was background noise, annual dues, pool key, trash cans, mailbox paint. The kind of thing you complained about once in a while and then forgot until Karen Whitmore became president. I did not think about Karen that first night. I thought about Dad. I thought about how he pretended not to need help getting from the recliner to the bathroom. I thought about how angry he looked when I had to lift his right foot onto the footrest. I thought about the way he kept apologizing for being a burden, like age and illness were character flaws. The next morning, I called a licensed contractor named Ellie Brooks. He specialized in accessibility work. Ramps, grab bars, widened thresholds, handrails. He came out that afternoon, measured the porch, checked the slope, and told me what would work. "We can build it clean," he said. "Treated lumber, proper handrails, non-slip strips, it'll be sturdy, and it won't block the sidewalk." "How soon?" He looked through the front window at Dad sitting in the recliner, with his navy cap in his lap. "I can start tomorrow." Before he left, Ellie asked, "You have an HOA?" I almost laughed. "Unfortunately." "Send them the doctor letter and photos. Call it a medical accommodation request. Do it in writing." So I did that same evening. I wrote the first email subject: medical accommodation request, wheelchair ramp for Frank Miller. I attached the doctor's letter, stating my father required wheelchair access for safe entry and exit. I attached Ellie's plan, measurements, photos of the porch, his license and his insurance. I wrote that the ramp was medically necessary, temporary if Dad's condition improved, and designed not to block sidewalks, common areas, or sightlines. Then I sent the same packet by certified mail to the HOA management company. I was careful, because I am the kind of man who reads instructions twice when someone I love depends on the result. 2 days later, the certified mail tracking showed delivered. That should have been the beginning of a review. Instead, it became the beginning of Karen. Her first email arrived at 6:41 that evening. David, the association has not approved exterior alterations to your front elevation. Please do not begin construction until the architectural committee has completed its review. I answered politely, "Thank you, Karen. This is a medical accommodation request for my father after his stroke. The contractor is scheduled because he has follow-up appointments and cannot safely leave the house without a ramp. Please confirm the committee has received the doctor letter and plans." She replied 8 minutes later, "Medical circumstances do not eliminate the need for architectural consistency." There it was, not a denial, not exactly, just a sentence that put appearance in front of access. I forwarded the email to the management company and asked whether the accommodation request had been received. A woman named Paige answered the next morning. "Mr. Miller, yes, we received your certified packet and uploaded it to the owner file. I have noted that this is being presented as a medical accommodation request." Being presented as that wording bothered me, but I told myself not to read too much into it. People in offices use cautious language. That did not mean anyone was trying to trap us. Then Mrs. Parker called. She lived across the street. A widow in her 70s, the kind of neighbor who knew when someone was sick before they wanted people to know. She had brought soup the night Dad came home. "David," she said, "Karen was at the mailbox cluster, asking about your ramp. It isn't even built yet." "I know, she told someone that if your ramp stays, everyone will start adding medical equipment to their houses." I remember looking through the kitchen window at my father, sleeping in the recliner. Medical equipment. That was how Karen talked about a ramp before the first board review, before the first committee meeting, before the last handrail had even been installed. The next morning, Eli arrived with lumber, tools, and 2 helpers. Dad insisted on sitting by the window to watch. At 10:18, before Eli had finished the first side rail, my doorbell camera caught Karen slowing her car in front of the house. She did not stop. She just rolled by, lifted her phone, and took a picture through the passenger window. 20 minutes later, she walked back on the sidewalk and took another one. The ramp did not even have handrails yet. She was already building her file. Dad saw her through the window and looked away. "Maybe we should wait," he said. "For what? For people to calm down." I looked at the 2 porch steps. "Dad, your doctor appointment is Monday." He nodded, but I could see the old embarrassment settle over him again. He had spent his life being useful. Now he felt like his need for a safe exit was causing trouble. That is what HOA board abuse does when it hides behind polite language. It makes the person who needs help feel like the problem. By late afternoon, the ramp was finished. It looked clean, simple, solid. Eli matched the porch stain as close as he could. The handrails were smooth. The slope was gentle. The sidewalk was clear. Dad rolled onto it for the first time at sunset. He moved slowly, one hand on the wheel, one hand brushing the rail. Halfway down, he stopped. "You built me a runway," he said. "No," I said. "An exit." He looked at me, and for the first time since the hospital, he laughed. The first violation notice came the next day. Not after a committee meeting, not after anyone called me, not after a written review. Karen emailed it at 8:03 in the morning. "Unapproved exterior structure, immediate correction required." She wrote that the ramp altered the front elevation, failed to match approved neighborhood appearance, and created a visible institutional impression inconsistent with Briar Creek property values. Institutional impression. I read that phrase 3 times. Then, I opened the HOA portal and checked the architectural committee calendar. No meeting had been held, no agenda listed my request, no minutes existed. So I emailed Karen, the management company, and the board. "Please confirm whether the medical accommodation request was reviewed, the date of the review, and the basis for this violation notice." Karen answered first. "The ramp was installed without approval. The matter is therefore a violation. I wrote back. It was installed after the HOA received a medical accommodations request and doctor letter. Please provide the written decision on that request. She did not provide one. Instead, she came to the house. The doorbell camera caught her at 5:22 p.m., standing at the bottom of the ramp with a tape measure in one hand and her phone in the other. She took photos from the sidewalk, from the driveway, and from the street. Then she stepped onto the first board and pressed her shoe down like she expected it to collapse. I opened the door. Dad was behind me in the hallway. Karen smiled. David, documenting the impact. The impact on what the appearance of the property. My father needs it to get out. Nobody disputes that your father has needs, she said. But needs do not erase. Process. There was that reasonable voice again. The one that made cruelty sound like paperwork. I asked, has the architectural committee reviewed the request? The ramp was already built. That is not an answer. She looked past me at Dad. I would encourage you not to put your father in the middle of an association matter. He is the reason there is an accommodation request. Karen's smile disappeared for just a second. The board cannot allow emotional circumstances to override standards. I saved that clip too. By the end of the week, I had learned 4 things. First, the management company had received my certified packet. Second, the architectural committee had not met. Third, Karen had photographed the ramp before it was even finished. Fourth, Karen had already decided the ramp was a violation before any review happened. That was when I started the folder. Frank ramp accommodation. Went to the doctor letter, certified mail receipt, contractor invoice, photos, Karen's emails, pages confirmation, HOA calendar, screenshots, Mrs. Parks's text, and adorable memory clips. At the time it felt excessive, like maybe I was overreacting. Then Karen sent the second notice. This one added the first fine $500 for unapproved construction, plus a warning that continued non-compliance could result in daily fines, contractor removal, legal fees, and possible lien action. Dad saw the word lien and went quiet for the rest of the night. That was when I stopped thinking. Karen was confused. Confused people ask questions. Karen was building a case backward. She had decided the ramp was ugly. Now she was trying to make the paperwork agree. And the next email she sent proved exactly how far she was willing to go. The next email arrived at 6:18 the following morning. I was pouring Dad's oatmeal into a bowl when my phone buzzed on the counter. He was in the living room, half listening to the weather report, pretending he was not waiting to hear whether Karen had backed down. She had not. The subject line said, second notice, exterior structure violation, daily fine warning. I opened it and felt the same cold weight I had felt when I saw the word lien. David, Karen wrote, because you have failed to remove the unapproved ramp. A daily fine of $250 will begin tomorrow. The association may pursue all remedies available under the covenants, including contractor removal, legal fees, and lien action under that. She added one sentence that told me exactly what this was really about. Personal hardship cannot be allowed to override the appearance standards that protect every homeowner's property values. Property values. Not safety, not access, not my father. Doctor, property values, Dad asked from the living room. More trouble? I looked at the email, then at him. His right hand rested on the wheelchair wheel, fingers curled but weak. His navy cap sat crooked on his head because he had tried to put it on himself. No. I said, more evidence. That became the way I survived the next week. Every time Karen sent a threat, I saved it. Every time she used the word appearance instead of access, I highlighted it. Every time she claimed the board had acted, I asked for minutes, and every time she refused to produce them, my folder got stronger. I replied to Karen, copying the management company and the full board address. Please confirm the date the medical accommodation request was reviewed, the names of the committee members present, the written decision, and the basis for imposing daily fines while the request remains unanswered. Karen answered, in 11 minutes, your attempt to reframe a covenant violation as a medical issue is noted. I read that sentence out loud in the kitchen. Dad looked down. That one hurt him, not because of the money, because she had taken the most vulnerable thing in his life and called it a strategy. I wanted to type something angry. I wanted to tell her exactly what kind of person reduces a stroke survivor to a landscaping problem. Instead, I got up, poured Dad's coffee, and waited until my hands stopped shaking. Then I wrote one line in the timeline: Karen denies medical nature of ramp despite doctor letter. That afternoon, Mrs. Parker came over with banana bread wrapped in foil and a worried look on her face. She is talking again. She said, "Karen?" Mrs. Parker nodded. At the mailbox cluster, she said, "If she lets your ramp stay, people will start building whatever they want and calling it medical." Dad was sitting near the window. He heard every word. Mrs. Parker saw his face and softened her voice. "Frank, nobody decent thinks that ramp is a problem." Dad gave her a small smile. "Decent people don't write the fines." Mom, that line stayed with me. Most of the neighborhood was not cruel. Most people waved, brought soup, asked how Dad was doing, and looked away when Karen started performing. But HOA board abuse does not need everyone to be cruel. It only needs enough good people to stay quiet while one person acts official. 2 days later, Karen made it public. She posted in the Briar Creek Facebook group without using my name. Reminder: exterior modifications, including ramps, rails, platforms, and other structures, must be approved before installation. Emotional circumstances do not exempt homeowners from standards that preserve the character of our community. Within minutes, people began commenting. "Is this about Frank's ramp? Who complains about a wheelchair? Ramp, don't we have disability rules for this?" Karen replied, "The board cannot discuss individual violations. However, no homeowner may unilaterally alter the community appearance and expect special treatment." Special treatment. My father read that over my shoulder and rolled his chair away before I could stop him. I took screenshots, all of them. Then I checked the HOA portal again. Still no architectural committee meeting, still no agenda, still no vote. That same evening, Paige from the management company called me. Not emailed, called. Her voice was careful. "Mr. Miller, I wanted to confirm that we received your request and supporting documentation." "I know," I said. "You confirmed that already." "Yes, sir. I also want to say that the file is currently marked as pending review." "Then why am I being fined?" There was a pause. "I cannot speak for the board." "Did the management company issue the fine?" Another pause. "No, sir." The notice was entered by President Whitmore. "Did management advise daily fines before the accommodation request was reviewed?" "No, sir. I wrote everything down." Then Paige added, "Quieter, please keep everything in writing going forward." That was the second time someone inside the system told me to build a record without saying those exact words. By Friday, the balance had reached $1,250. By Monday, it was $2,000. That was more than Dad's prescriptions, the ramp deposit, and the next mortgage payment combined. Karen was not just threatening a structure. She was putting a price tag on whether my father could leave the house safely every morning. Another notice arrived with another $250 added, as if my father's need for sunlight was a parking violation. Then Dad stopped asking to go outside. That was the part that made me hate Karen most. Not the money, not the emails, not even the public shame. It was the way Dad would sit near the living room window and look at the ramp like it belonged to someone else, like using it made him guilty, like every board underneath his wheels cost me another piece of the house. On Tuesday morning, I found him trying to push himself toward the back door. There were 3 steps there. "Dad, what are you doing?" He froze like a kid caught stealing. I thought maybe I could get out this way. You can to use the back steps." "I don't want to make things worse." I knelt in front of him. "You are not making things worse. Karen is." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I used to be useful." That hit harder than any fine. After he went to bed that night, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the state law I had printed from the Attorney General's website. I am not a lawyer. I do not pretend to be, but even I could understand the plain language about reasonable accommodations for disability-related access. So, the next morning I called an attorney named Rachel Stun. I told her about the ramp, the doctor letter, the certified request, the daily fines, the Facebook post, and the fact that no committee had reviewed anything. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "David, do not threaten Karen. Do not argue with her on Facebook. Do not remove the ramp. Keep everything in writing. If she keeps prioritizing aesthetics over disability access, let her keep proving it." I asked, "Can they fine us while the accommodation request is pending?" Her answer was careful. "They can claim a lot of things. What matters is what they can support with documents. Right now, from what you are describing, she is creating a record that may be very bad for her." That was the first time I felt the story turn. Not because Karen got weaker, because I understood how she was losing. She thought she was building a violation file. What she was really building was my case. Rachel asked me to send everything. I sent the doctor letter, certified mail receipt, contractor invoice, ramp photos, HOA portal screenshots, page emails, Karen S notices, Facebook screenshots, and doorbell camera clips. Then I added one more thing. A short video Dad did not know I had saved. It was from the first evening. He used the ramp. He rolled down slowly, touched the handrail, and laughed when he called it a runway. Rachel replied 3 hours later, "Keep that too, it shows what the accommodation is for." The next day, Karen showed up with a tape measure again. This time, she brought Linda from the architectural committee and Paul from the board. Linda looked like she regretted getting out of the car. Paul stood 2 steps behind Karen, hands in his pockets, avoiding the doorbell camera like it owed him money. Karen held a clipboard. "We are here for an exterior compliance inspection." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You are welcome to look from the sidewalk. You are not coming onto the ramp." Karen smiled. "The ramp is the subject of inspection. The ramp is my father's accessible entrance. The ramp is an unapproved structure. The accommodation request is pending, because you built before approval, because my father had a doctor appointment." Linda whispered, "Karen, maybe we should wait for management." Karen ignored her. Then she raised her voice just enough for the camera. "David, your refusal to cooperate is being documented." I nodded. "Good. So is yours." Paul looked at the camera. Then Karen leaned closer. "If this remains unresolved, the association may have no choice but to send a contractor to remove my disabled father's ramp, to correct an unauthorized structure," she said. There it was again. "Clean language for a dirty act," I asked. "Did the board vote on contractor removal?" Karen tapped the clipboard. "The board supports enforcement." "Who voted?" Her eyes narrowed. "You will receive appropriate documentation when necessary." After they left, Linda stayed behind for half a second at the walkway. She did not look at me directly, but she said, "Ask for the minutes." Then she hurried after Karen. I saved that too by the end of the second week. Karen had sent a pre-lien warning. The balance was over $4,000. She had posted twice in the Facebook group. She had photographed the ramp from the street 6 times. She had called the city code office claiming the ramp was unsafe. The inspector came out on a Wednesday. He checked the slope, the handrails, the non-slip strips, the clear walkway, and Ellie's permit paperwork. Dad watched from the doorway, ashamed for no reason. The inspector handed me a card and spoke carefully. "I'll note in the report that the ramp appears code compliant based on what I can inspect today. I don't see an immediate safety issue." Karen, who had been waiting on the sidewalk, stepped forward. "So you reapproving unpermitted medical construction in an HOA community?" The inspector gave her a tired look. "Mom, I inspect for code. I didn't enforce." "HOA aesthetics." I asked for the report number. Karen glared at me. I wrote it down that evening. Karen sent the email that changed everything. She meant to send it to the board and the management company, but I was still copied from the previous thread. "David continues to hide behind his father's condition to avoid compliance. If he refuses to remove the ramp before the meeting, I will authorize contractor correction and we can formalize the board position afterward. We cannot let disability language become a loophole." Disability language, a loophole. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at those words while Dad slept in the recliner, the television glowing blue across his face. Then I forwarded the email to Rachel. I saved it in 3 places. I printed it. And I added it to the front of the folder, because Karen had just put in writing what I had known from the beginning. She did not see my father. She saw an exception she wanted to crush, and by then I knew the next thing she tried would not be another notice. It would be a contractor. The contractor showed up at 8:02 on Monday morning. I know because the doorbell camera caught his white pickup turning into the driveway while Dad was still buttoning his shirt for his follow-up appointment. Ellis ramp was right outside the front door, clean, solid, and dry from the night before. Dad had already put on his navy cap. His appointment card was clipped to the discharge folder on the kitchen table. For the first time all week, he looked ready to leave the house without apologizing for needing help. Then my phone buzzed, motion detected at front porch. I opened the feed and saw Karen standing beside a man in a work vest, pointing at the ramp with the same clipboard she had used like a weapon for 2 weeks. Behind them was a flatbed trailer. My stomach went cold. Dad looked at my face. "What now?" "Stay here," I said. I hit record, saved the live feed, and backed it up before I opened the door. Karen smiled before I said a word. "Good morning, David. The association is proceeding with correction." The contractor looked uncomfortable. He was maybe late 30s, sunburned neck, work boots, and the expression of a man who had been told this was a simple job and had just realized it was not. I looked at him. "What were you hired to do?" He checked his phone. "Remove an unauthorized exterior ramp." "My father is in a wheelchair," I said. "This is his accessible entrance." Karen cut in. "It is an unapproved structure." The contractor glanced through the doorway and saw Dad sitting in the hall. His eyes changed. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "you told me nobody was using it." Karen's smile tightened. "I said it was not approved. That's not the same thing." I stayed quiet. That was something Rachel had told me. When other people start telling the truth, do not interrupt them. Karen stepped onto the first board of the ramp. "The homeowner has been fined repeatedly and refused to comply. The board supports enforcement." I asked, "What date did the board vote to remove a disability access ramp?" She looked at the camera, then back at me. "This does not need to become dramatic. It became dramatic when you brought a contractor to take away my father's exit." Dad rolled closer to the doorway. Karen saw him and lowered her voice into that sweet, official tone. "Mr. Miller, no one is trying to harm you. This ramp simply does not meet community standards." Dad looked at the contractor, not at her. "Son," he said, "can I get out the back door in this chair?" The contractor looked past me toward the hallway. I answered, "No, 3 steps." Karen snapped, "He can use the back door like everyone else." The contractor took a step back. There it was, on camera. Not just cruelty. Practical impossibility, she knew. The front ramp was his safe exit, and she still wanted it removed. I asked the contractor for his company name and work order. He gave both without arguing. Karen said, "You are interfering with association enforcement." "No," I said. "I'm documenting who sent a contractor to remove a medically necessary ramp before the accommodation request was reviewed." The contractor looked at Karen. "I'm not touching this until I see written approval from the board and something saying this is to disability related." Karen's face went red. "You were hired to perform a job, and now I am declining it until your paperwork is clear." He walked back to his truck. Karen stood there, breathing hard through her nose, trying to look in control, while the job she ordered fell apart in my driveway. Before she left, she turned toward the camera and said, "This will be addressed at the meeting tonight." I nodded. "Yes, it will." By the time the contractor drove away, Dad's appointment was already in danger. I had to call the clinic, explain why my father might be late, and listen to the receptionist pause. When I said the HOA had tried to remove his wheelchair ramp, Dad sat in the hallway the whole time, dressed for the doctor, looking like he was the one causing trouble. That was what made me angriest. Karen had not just threatened wood and screws. She had made a sick old man question whether he deserved to leave the house. By noon, Rachel had the contractor's work order, the company name, the doorbell clip, and Karen's email about formalizing the board position afterward. By 4 o'clock, she had sent a preservation letter to the HOA, the management company, and the contractor, asking them to keep every email, work order, call log, invoice, board note, text message, and instruction related to the ramp. Karen wanted a meeting. So that evening, I brought a folder. The clubhouse was packed by 6:30. There were more people than chairs. Retired couples stood near the coffee table. Mrs. Parker sat near the front. The contractor did not attend in person, but Rachel had his written statement and permission to read the work order. Mr. Nolan from the management company sat at the board table with a legal pad and the careful floor, and he had spent that afternoon learning the word liability. Karen opened with her usual sigh. "We are here because one homeowner has chosen to ignore association rules and create an unsafe precedent for the entire community," someone in the back said. The treasurer tapped the table. "Order, please." Karen continued. "No one questions Mr. Miller's condition, but emotional circumstances cannot be allowed to override architectural standards." I stood up. "Before this is discussed, I want the record to show that my father is the person affected by this decision." Dad rolled forward beside me. The room changed. He wore his navy cap and the blue jacket he used to wear to church. His right hand rested weakly on the wheel, but his voice was steady. "That ramp is how I get outside," he said. That is all I have to say. Then he rolled back beside Mrs. Parker. Karen looked irritated that he had not given her anything to argue with. She tried to move the matter into executive session. This involves medical information and enforcement records, she said. Rachel stood. Mr. Miller is present, his son is present, and the enforcement action occurred at their front door this morning. We request that any board action concerning the ramp be entered into the minutes. Mr. Nolan leaned toward the microphone. For clarity, management is not taking a legal position tonight. However, disability-related accommodation requests should be handled with documented review, and vendor action should not proceed without clear board authority. Karen turned on him. Management has been aware of this violation. Mr. Nolan kept his voice flat. Management received the accommodation packet. Management did not issue the contractor instruction. The room started murmuring. The treasurer said, louder, order. Karen pointed toward me. David has selectively framed this as a disability issue. To avoid compliance, that was when I opened the folder. I put the doctor letter on the screen first, then the certified mail receipt. Then Paige asked confirmation that the packet had been uploaded to the owner file. Then the HOA calendar showing no architectural committee meeting. Then the portal screenshot showing no agenda, no minutes, no vote. I did not explain much. I just read dates, request sent, packet delivered. File confirmed, no meeting, no decision. First violation issued anyway. Karen interrupted. The ramp was built without final approval. Rachel answered. The question is why the accommodation request was never reviewed before fines and removal threats began. I clicked to the Facebook screenshots, then the notices, then the $250 per day fine schedule, then the pre-lien warning. A man near the back said, they threatened a lien over that? Karen snapped. Please do not make comments from the audience. Mrs. Parker said, you made comments at the mailbox. The treasurer hit the table with his palm. Order. Everyone will get a chance, but one at a time. Then I put Karen S. email on the screen. David continues to hide behind his father S. condition to avoid compliance. If he refuses to remove the ramp before the meeting, I will authorize contractor correction, and we can formalize the board position afterward. We cannot let disability language become a loophole. The room went still. Karen stood halfway up. That internal email is being taken out of context. Rachel asked, which part? Karen blinked. The intent was to protect the association from abuse of process. Mr. Nolan adjusted his glasses. For the record, management did not advise retroactive documentation of board approval. Karen S. mouth opened, but the treasurer said, let the record reflect that statement. Then I played the doorbell video from that morning. Karen's voice came through the speakers. He can use the back door like everyone else. Then my voice. No 3 steps. Then the contractor. I'm not touching this until I see written approval from the board and something saying this isn't disability related. The video ended. Nobody spoke at first. That silence was not confusion, it was recognition. People knew what they had heard. Karen tried again. The contractor misunderstood the scope of work. Rachel read the work order. Remove front ramp structure from residence due to HOA violation. Requested by Karen Whitmore, HOA president. Paul rubbed his face with both hands. Linda from the architectural committee finally spoke. For the record, she said, her voice shaking, the architectural committee never met on this request. Karen turned toward her. Linda, that is not helpful. Linda looked at her. "Es true." The room broke open. "She fined me for a handrail," someone said. "She told me my walker ramp was temporary. She called my mother S. Gabriel an eyesore." The treasurer stood. "Order, we are not resolving every complaint tonight." Mr. Nolan spoke carefully, given the documentation presented. Management recommends immediate suspension of fines related to this ramp pending legal review, no vendor action, and a formal accommodation review entered into the minutes. Karen said, "You are letting one homeowner bully the association." Dad spoke from his chair. "I spent 22 years following rules," he said. "Rules are not supposed to trap a man in his house." That ended the argument. Not legally, not officially, but emotionally, the room had already left Karen behind. The board called a recess. Karen objected. "This is a coordinated ambush." The treasurer looked exhausted. "No, Karen, this is a liability issue." That word changed the room. Liability. For the first time since this started, Karen looked scared. 25 minutes later, the board returned. The treasurer read a temporary action into the minutes. All fines related to the Miller ramp are suspended pending legal review. No contractor, vendor, or board member may remove or alter the ramp. Emma's Whitmore S. authority to issue enforcement notices or contact vendors regarding this matter is suspended pending board review. A special meeting will be scheduled to address accommodation procedures and board authority. Karen stared at the table as people stood to leave. Mrs. Parker squeezed Dad's shoulder. He looked tired but not ashamed. Karen passed me near the door. "This is not over," she whispered. I looked back toward the front table, where the minutes were still being typed. "No," I said, "now it's official." And by the next morning, the management company, the contractor, and 3 other families with accessibility complaints were all asking the same question Karen had spent years avoiding. How many medical needs had she turned into violations? The next morning, the ramp was still there. That sounds like a small thing, unless you have ever watched someone you love look at a doorway like it might be the edge of their world. Dad rolled himself to the front hall after breakfast and stopped at the threshold. Morning light sat on the handrails. The boards were still damp from overnight mist. No contractor, no trailer, no red notice. Just the ramp exactly where it belonged. For the first time in weeks, Dad did not ask if using it would make things worse. He just looked at me and said, "Coffee outside?" I helped him over the threshold, then let go as soon as his wheels touched the boards. He wanted to do it himself. Slowly. One hand on the wheel and one hand brushing the rail, he rolled down the ramp and onto the walk. At the bottom, he closed his eyes and took a breath like the air had been waiting for him. That was the first real victory. Not the meeting, not the silence on Karen's face, not the word liability hanging over the clubhouse like a storm cloud. It was my father sitting in the morning sun with a mug of coffee in front of the house he had worked his whole life to keep without asking permission to exist. But the official victory took longer. 3 days after the meeting, the management company sent a formal letter. It was short, careful, and written in the kind of language people use when attorneys are copied on every line. All fines related to the Miller ramp were suspended pending final review. All contractor action was canceled. No board member was authorized to remove, alter, or interfere with the ramp. The medical accommodation request would be reviewed at a special session with counsel present. I read the letter twice, then showed it to Dad. He adjusted his glasses and said, "So they were not taking it, not today." He nodded, but I could tell he did not fully trust it yet. I did not blame him. Fear leaves marks. Karen had spent weeks teaching him that every board under his wheels might cost us money. One letter did not undo that overnight. The special session happened the following Tuesday. This time, Karen did not sit in the middle chair. The treasurer did. Mr. Nolan from management sat beside him with a thick folder. And Rachel sat next to me with the calm expression of someone who had brought copies for everyone. Karen came in late. No white HOA polo, no clipboard. Just a navy blazer, a tight mouth, and a stack of papers. She kept tapping against the table, like straight edges could make facts line up for her. The treasurer opened the meeting. For the record, this session concerns the Miller accommodation request, enforcement actions taken before formal review, and board authority regarding accessibility-related modifications. Accessibility-related modifications, not eyesores, not emotional exceptions, not loopholes. For the first time, the ramp was being named correctly. Ms. Nolan spoke next. Management's preliminary review confirms that the accommodation packet was received before the first violation notice was issued. We do not have records showing that the architectural committee reviewed the request before fines began. Karen leaned toward her microphone. I object to the implication that I acted improperly. The ramp was installed without final approval, and I was protecting the community from setting a dangerous precedent. Rachel opened her folder. The precedent at issue, she said, is whether an HOA president can ignore a documented medical accommodation request, impose fines, threaten removal, and attempt to authorize a contractor before any recorded review. The room went quiet. Then Dad spoke from beside me. "Time to want a precedent," he said. "I want to get out my front door." Nobody answered that, because there was nothing to answer. The vote came after 40 minutes of careful discussion. A lot of shuffling papers and Karen repeating the words property values until they lost all meaning. The board approved the accommodation. In writing, the ramp was allowed to remain. The approval included the doctor letter, the contractor plan, the photos. and a condition that any future maintenance would be my responsibility unless Dad no longer needed it. That was fair. I could live with fair. Then came the second vote. All fines related to the ramp were canceled. The $10,000 balance was removed. The daily fines were voided. The pre-lien warning was withdrawn. The contractor charge was rejected. The HOA agreed to reimburse the cancellation fee Rachel had negotiated with the contractor. And later, as part of a settlement, they covered part of my attorney fees. It was not dramatic. No one slammed a fist on the table. No one yelled. Justice served. Real legal revenge usually sounds like a tired treasurer reading motions into the minutes while everyone pretends not to look at the person who caused the mess. Then, the treasurer turned toward Dad. "Mr. Miller," he said, "this should have been reviewed before any fine was issued. It should never have reached the point where a contractor came to your home. On behalf of the board, I apologize." Dad looked at him for a long moment. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He just nodded once and said, "Make sure it doesn't happen to the next person." That was my father. Even after everything, he was not looking for revenge. He was looking for a rule that protected the next person who could not stand up easily enough to fight back. Then came the motion Karen did not expect. Clymer Tolsch. Motion to remove Karen Whitmore from the office of HOA president, suspend her authority to issue enforcement notices, revoke her vendor contact privileges, and require immediate turnover of association records, templates, login credentials, and correspondence pending completion of an enforcement audit. Karen stood up. "This is retaliation," she said. "I enforced. This board was too weak to enforce now. I am being punished because one homeowner turned a private matter into a public spectacle." Mrs. Parker stood in the back. "You made it public when you talked about his father at the mailbox." A man near the side wall raised his hand. "You fined my wife's handrail last year." Another woman said, "You told my mother her walker ramp made the street look temporary." The treasurer held up both hands. "Order. The audit will address prior complaints. We are voting on board authority." Karen looked around the room, searching for the fear she used to control. It was gone. The vote was 4-1. Karen was removed as HOA president. For a moment, she just stood there, one hand on the back of the chair, blinking like the room had betrayed her. But the room had not betrayed her. The paperwork had caught up. Over the next 6 weeks, the audit widened. Homeowners brought in envelopes, screenshots, checks, certified letters, and photographs. Not every complaint was the same. Some were small. Some were serious, but the pattern was familiar. Karen declared something a violation, claimed the board supported enforcement, pushed fines before records existed, and counted on people paying because they were tired or scared. 3 cases involved accessibility. Mrs. Parker had been warned about an exterior handrail after her hip surgery. A retired schoolteacher named Anne had paid a temporary structure fee for a small portable ramp her husband used after knee replacement. Another family had been told a reserved medical parking sign near their garage was visually disruptive. Those files were reopened. 2 families received refunds. Mrs. Parker was removed from her account. The retired teacher got back $300 and cried when the treasurer handed her the check. Not because it was a lot of money, but because someone finally admitted she should not have paid it. That is what people miss about fake HOA fines. The money matters, but the record matters more. A fake violation sits there like a stain. It says you were difficult, you were non-compliant. You were the problem. Getting it removed is not just accounting, it is getting your name back. The HOA adopted new accommodation procedures after that. Every medical or disability-related request had to be logged within 2 business days. The management company had to confirm receipt in writing. No fines could be issued while the request was pending. No board member could deny or delay review alone. Any denial had to cite specific documents and include an appeal process. No contractor could remove or alter any access-related structure without legal review and a recorded board vote. Homeowner rights stopped being something people shouted during arguments. They became procedure. As for Karen, she resigned from the board before the audit report was finalized. Her resignation email said the community had become hostile to standards and ungrateful for volunteer leadership. Nobody replied. That silence was the neighborhood's final vote. I saw her once at the grocery store a month later. She turned into another aisle when she saw me. I did not follow her. I did not need to. I had no interest in petty revenge. I had the clean kind, the kind with meeting minutes, certified mail, doctor letters, state law, doorbell camera evidence, and her own words sitting in a folder she could not talk her way out of. The last piece came in the mail on a Friday. A formal accommodation approval letter. I put it in a frame. Dad laughed when he saw it. You framed HOA paperwork? Yes, sir. Your mother would have called that ugly. She would have hung it anyway. He smiled at that. That evening he rolled down the ramp by himself. Slowly, but by himself, he went all the way to the mailbox, opened it, and pulled out nothing but a grocery flyer and an electric bill. He held them up like trophies. When he came back, he stopped halfway up the ramp and looked at the house. I thought I was going to lose this place, he said. You were never going to lose it. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on the front door. A man gets old, he said, and people start talking around him like he's already gone. I did not know what to say to that, so I just stood beside him until he was ready to go inside. That is why these HOA stories matter. Because fake authority does not just take money. It takes peace. It makes decent people feel like burdens. It turns a wheelchair ramp into a violation, a doctor letter into an inconvenience, and a family home into a place where an old man is afraid to roll outside. But fake authority collapses when real evidence appears. Karen counted on fear. She counted on confusion. She counted on people staying quiet, paying the fines, and accepting that a clipboard mattered more than a medical need. She counted wrong. Swung. So keep your receipts if an HOA Karen threatens your ramp, your handrail, your driveway, your truck, your service dog, your garden, or your family home. Do not just get loud. Get organized. Save the notice, request the minutes, read the bylaws, back up the footage, write down names, dates, and times. Bullies count on silence. Evidence gives ordinary people their voice back, and if you have ever dealt with fake HOA fines, HOA board abuse, or a Karen who thought community standards mattered more than human dignity, tell me your story in the comments. What would you have done? Would you have fought back immediately, or waited until she created the perfect record against herself? Because someone watching this right now may be sitting at their kitchen table with a red notice in their hand, wondering if they are the only one. They are not, and neither were we.